knowing that there were many ears spread out. He noticed that the boy had a superior intelligence, as he had expanded the problem between two people to the whole school. Also trying to act intelligently, the vice director said that the students' words were correct, notifying that students who disregarded the match rules deserved to be punished according to the norms. However, punishing a student for a mistake was his and the academy's function, not something that a student like him could deal with. The protagonist noticed that he was dealing with someone of equal or superior intelligence. The assistant professor smiled upon hearing Ban's conversation, and the vice director thought that, no matter the nonsense they said, his opponent was strong. With that, the student said that if the director was right, and if he had infringed on the authority of the professors, he apologized, and he concluded by saying that, in any case, he was willing to accept the punishment for what he had done. The vice director was satisfied to hear that. The director said it was all fine and that he wasn't asking to discuss punishment in the first place. Those words left the protagonist relieved, but the assistant professor was speechless. Zenon, thinking he had understood, believed that that young man had enough eloquence to win the favor of a constellation. He announced to everyone that he would accept Ban Yuan's self-defense as justified. Those words made Slyton Ruchel happy. The assistant professor even tried to argue with the vice director, who told him to stand still and stop that embarrassing behavior. In addition, the assistant professor also got a scolding for not having acted correctly with the students. He had not shown the necessary vigor during the match and said that the right arm was something easy to solve, ending the matter. A warning was given for the students who were watching the match to return to their places. While the warnings were given, Dako was relieved as everything ended without further incidents, and Slight agreed with her. The director also said that the student Ban had dedicated himself a lot and could leave at that moment. Showing education, he bowed to the assistant professor, who was dying of rage at that moment, and left. He was turning to leave when he seemed to notice something. The communicator still said, "See you later." However, when he turned and looked, there was no message on the screen. Ban felt that it was happening again. After the incident, he joined his friends, who were happy for him to be back. Light said that the swordsman blows he used at the end were incredible. The protagonist said that this must have been because of the tower. Dako praised, saying she liked to watch, since he had gotten stronger. She asked him what it felt like to gain a new power and if he thought it was useful. A little embarrassed, he put his hand to his head and said that all of that was because she had trained him very diligently. Dako made the protagonist awkward when she brought up the stone man's arm. She made him even more scared when she said she knew he had absorbed it. This made him remember when he was in the arena, and the message appeared. He didn't think that was possible. The system message showed several possibilities in which he could choose. For safety, he took just a little bit, and when it worked, he thought what was happening was unbelievable. He took a little of each and saw that all the traits were incredibly strong. Until that moment, he could not manipulate the concept of living people at will. He told his friends that he could now take specific parts by cutting them. His expression became sad when he said that he ended up absorbing the strength of the opponent's right arm. Dako asked him if it wasn't a good thing and why he was pretending not to be. He said that at first he was happy to be getting stronger, but then when he saw, he was not fighting with the monster from before. He shared with his friends that, after everything, he felt abnormal and uncomfortable. The white-haired young woman, screaming, told him to raise his head because there was no reason to say such nonsense. She reminded him that that person had gone on top with murderous intentions all the time. She told the protagonist that, in a kill or be killed situation, he should know what the choice would be. Those words from his friend brought a little comfort to the protagonist, hearing her saying that he shouldn't feel guilty for having made his choice. After he calmed down a bit, he said that he was overthinking things and apologized to his friends. Dako told him that he couldn't just go around cutting the arm off those from the so-called special class. While the girls were fighting, he seemed to have received a message that left him very worried, even shouting. His shouts scared his friends, who didn't know what was happening in the face of his shouting. There was a mandatory additional cost, which was the course on the constellations of Babylon taught by Professor Zenon. He taught how to get support from the constellations effectively and how to negotiate contracts with them smartly. This knowledge and preparation were useful to avoid the constellation's wrath. Now, that course was being offered to Class 11. Everyone watched when the people from the lower dimension began to pass. It was commented that the bargaining boy was walking around with his head held high, and the protagonist felt uncomfortable with the looks. While the protagonist and his friends went up the stairs, they heard several comments from people who were for and against them. He, looking back, saw that all his friends were upset and apprehensive about the comments. Making a mysterious expression, he told his friends that the more people were cursed, the more they lived. While walking, he was pulled by the wrist by Ruchel, who seemed to want to say something to him. She was worried about what had happened the day before and feared that more people would start to dislike them. Upset, she said that everyone said what they wanted without even knowing what kind of person he was. Seeing the sadness in her eyes, the protagonist tried to calm her down, saying that it was all good. Putting his hand on her head, he asked her not to worry so much about these things, and he thanked her for all the affection she was showing him. However, those who were watching them were not liking that intimacy at all. Light and Dako thought it was unnecessary. They had already gone out together on the weekend, and now they were in perfect sync. Dako asked the pink-haired young woman if she had liked the clothes she received so much. Rochelle, who always kept quiet with the provocations, asked Dako if she was jealous, making the protagonist awkward. Dako got angry and mentioned to Rochelle, asking if she wasn't tired of getting beaten by her. Rochelle made it clear that she knew the young woman would continue to beat her one way or another. Standing at the door, they checked if that was the same classroom for the Constellations of Babylon. Light was sure that there was a class last week, but he didn't know what would happen if people like them mixed with the others. He was afraid of what the senior students might think, but the protagonist asked them not to worry about that. Gathering courage, he held the doorknob to open and start participating in the course. He replied to Slight that everyone would think that talented juniors would join them, but upon opening the door, even the protagonist showed to be quite nervous about the amount of people. All the people looked back when the door opened, seeming to stare at each of them. Dako thought that, because they were older and more experienced, even she couldn't ignore their abilities. The pink-haired young woman was visibly intimidated, as was Slight. The protagonist also didn't feel comfortable with all those people around him. Zenon, as soon as he saw the students, said that they, from class 11, were welcome to his lecture. The protagonist, when looking at the vice director, couldn't understand what his power was. Nothing about him was revealed. And when the man spoke, the protagonist noticed that that voice was the same as in the duel. Zenon began by saying that the origin of his classes was to understand the tower and the constellations. He told the people who joined the class that day that he would first talk about the tower. He began by saying that, at first glance, it seemed like a huge structure, without descriptive principles or ends. He said that the tower was no different from a living organism. The class, for the protagonist, seemed to be a bit boring. He explained that it might seem that they were claiming rewards for clearing the rooms. He said that this was not what happened. It wasn't because they found some rewards that the tower would gladly receive them. It did this to separate the most outstanding climbers among all, and for these it gave better and more exceptional treasures. There were also the transcendents, like the mediums. That was a basic condition for any intelligent being to be able to reason like a superior. It was a fragile system that could be turned upside down by a single irregular intruder through non-standard routes. All that professor's talk seemed like nonsense. The protagonist didn't believe in anything. Although he remained silent, he was always thinking about something. That was the moment when the Chancellor's mass email was sent. The protagonist remembered that this happened shortly after the intruder entered the tower. What if he assumed that the irregular phenomenon with the spider swarm in room 4 had been caused by the intruder? The problem was that the difficulty seemed strange in room 1 too, those things that were definitely elite monsters. It was strange if the tower had started in a strange way after they arrived in room 4 and the introduction began. With that, the strange things that happened in rooms 1, 2, and 3 could not be explained. Now, with the professor saying that the tower could be a living organism, things seemed to fit better. If you change the perspective, it could be that the tower didn't change the difficulty only because of the intruder. And yes, because everyone started climbing. This solution seemed easier. Now he didn't know if the insane difficulty was really the tower thinking for itself and putting difficulties. There was a moment when the protagonist's fight with his thoughts was so great that the friends next to him began to notice, as did the professor, who, although he didn't say anything at first, opened a smile, thinking that he was getting to his purpose. The protagonist was already sweating from so much thinking, but he still insisted, thinking that if the tower were a system, it would choose those people. As Professor Zenon was saying, with that, he looked to the sides and thought that there was no better place. He thought that his class had found difficulties and situations incomparable to the others. He thought that if so, the second phase would be even better, with more gold, more events, and magical items. He was reflecting on the concept of what happened in the tower room when someone asked if he had already found out. The professor, having caught the protagonist's attention, said that there was a barrier around and many students had not yet discovered it, and he congratulated Ban and Ruchel for finding an orb on the first day of class. With that, he told everyone present in that class that Class 11 was fully qualified to continue in the lectures. Zenon raised his hand up, throwing something into the air. Then, that poor violet orb landed. The professor said he had a question for the student Ban, and he asked what he saw when he looked at that sphere. Ban, even looking a lot, couldn't see anything, because because it was immeasurable or unknown. Being honest, he said he wasn't seeing anything. The professor asked him to concentrate a little more and check again. Although the protagonist said he couldn't see anything, the professor insisted that he focus a little more because there should be something there that he could see. Despite seeming to be genuinely trying, the words immeasurable and unknown were what he could perceive. He should try to discover